We are ready to roll. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll go with the slide deck first for maybe 30 minutes. Quick run through best way of encapsulating together yes as a process. And actually, this is the first time that this is the abridged version that Laura and I did yesterday, just to alter it a bit to take account of the fact that the first session materials are actually now up on the website. I want to give you a taste of those today. So let's go with Together Yes. So Chris has already acknowledged that we're on Wurundjeri country. I live and work on Wurundjeri country. I grew up in southwestern Victoria on Gulja Chamara country. And one of the reasons in paying our respects to elders past and present, one of the reasons we've come into this very campaign is because the Women's Trust has had a partnership for 31 years now with Koori Women Mean Business. Koori Women Mean Business in Victoria started with a grant from the Trust 31 years ago. We share offices with them up in Clifton Hill. And Leanne Miller, Yorta woman, head of Koori Women Mean Business, would tell you that in all of her travels around Australia, she has yet to come across an example of an Indigenous women's outfit partnering up with a non-Indigenous women's outfit for 31 years. And it is one of the motivating factors why we came into the campaign. So we have accepted that incredibly gracious invitation that's there in the Uluru Statement to join Indigenous Australians at base camp and trek across this vast country for a better world. That's the invitation. We've accepted that. It's an invitation to you and to me. It's specifically not an invitation to Australian politicians per se. It's inviting ordinary folk all around this country to join in that trek. And we come right in under the Yes 23 campaign from October last year. Now, I'd just like you to actually take a minute and I'd like you to read, and maybe you might even want to take a screenshot or photo of what I think is an extraordinary statement from Dr. Yunupingu, Yolnu elder, who sadly passed about 8 weeks ago. But just take a minute and I'll explain to you why we're using this as our starting position.
Mary, would you go to read it out just for people online? They're just struggling to see it. Is that
Okay.
right?
I will. Is there anyone with Indigenous heritage in the room? There is? I think it's better, if you don't mind. Are you comfy doing that?
Oh, no, sorry, that's Zoom. They have Zoom memory.
I'll still read it for accessibility.
Yeah, I think
That's all right.
that's great.
What Aboriginal people ask is that the modern world now makes the sacrifices necessary to give us real future, to relax its grip on us, to let us breathe, to let us be free of the determined control exerted on us to make us like you. And you should take that a step further and recognise us for who we are and not who you want us to be. Let us be who we are, Aboriginal people in a modern world, and be proud of us. Acknowledge that we have survived the worst, but the past has thrown at us, and we are here with our songs, our ceremonies, our land, our languages, and our people, our full identity. What a gift this is that we can give you if you choose to accept us in a meaningful way.
Thank you. And what a statement. We've survived the worst the past has thrown at us. We're here with our culture and our identity, the gift we can give all of us, but importantly, we need to choose whether we accept that gift in a meaningful way.
If you want to read the full essay from which that's taken, you go to the monthly in July 2016 and you read Dr. Yunupingu's full essay called Rom Watanga, The Law of the Land. And I would defy most Australians, if they read that full essay, I'd defy them to actually realise the import, the significance and the need to actually bring the referendum home, to be honest. The reason we've used this magnificent commentary is that this is our starting position. I'm not coming to you today some kind of value-free objective assessment of the yes case or the no case. We're here to bring them home. So that we're not neutral, we're pro-voice unashamedly, and we'll be pro-voice unashamedly right through to polling day. And I'm hoping come late October, we can actually celebrate. Modest proposal in this country. It's modest, but it will be enormously significant for the kind of future we want to carve out. So we come right in under the Yes 23 campaign, under the Australians for Constitutional Recognition. The body co-chaired by Rachel Perkins and Danny Gilbert was set up in February of this year to provide the overarching governance to the Yes 23 campaign, the fundraising body and oversight of the whole national strategy. So Dean Parkin was the CEO of From the Heart, where we had our initial partnership. Cara and Paul are the two deputy campaign directors, and the one we work in closely on a speed dial arrangement every day is with Emily Home. And I'm happy to say that over the last 6 weeks, they've been able to put boots on the ground in every state and territory to assist the campaign work. But the campaign, the Yes 23 campaign, is what, March, April, May, June, it's 3.5 months old. And the significance of that is that from the time the Prime Minister announced the referendum last year, the no vote, in effect, stole a march. They actually claimed the territory from June last year until February this year. And so the Yes campaign has had to compete clawback ground in that time. But we offered our services to this Indigenous-led national campaign, and it was very important that we come in under the campaign, that we were not on a frolic of our own, and that we are prepared to operate and accept the guidance and the strategic advice from the national campaign. Last October, three of us went up to Brisbane to be part of the 2-day workshop from the Heart, where we started to identify the principles that will form the basis to the Yes 23 campaign. And these were worked on over summer and they were released in late February in Adelaide. And I think it's really important to run through them with you. Be in solidarity, meaning that the campaign parties and partnerships and structures, we will not compete with one another. We won't let ego get in the way. We will have each other's backs. We will do no harm. We will not self-aggrandise. We will share information. We will support one another. We will honour culture, not only Indigenous leadership and the culture that comes with the campaigning. But I'll give you another really quick example of honouring culture. In February at the launch, I made a presentation at the invitation of From the Heart, and a Jewish woman from Sydney, Alona Lee, came up to me. She so got our method and process, and she said, I want to roll this out as a way for Jewish people around Australia to play a role. Is Together Yes capable of being modified for a culturally appropriate fit? Meaning, can it be rolled out as part of the Jewish custom of Friday night Shabbat, of dinner around the table? I said, of course it can. She said, but we wouldn't be able to have anything mechanical at the table. We can't have tools or we can't have a laptop at the table. I said, not a problem, we will make that work. And so you'll see in the first session materials that instead of being able to click a button on the laptop and listen to Megan Davis recite the Uluru Statement, the Jewish Shabbat dinners will actually have someone from their table read the printed copy of the Uluru Statement, which we provide. So that Shabbat Table Talks is just being launched. It's a most beautiful website and process. They've copied all of the copy from Together Yes website, finessed it to be in fitting with their sentiments and their worldview, and they're downloading the materials from our website for their Shabbats, Friday night Shabbats. And they've got community champions, the most wonderful set of men and women, community champions, including the Attorney General of this country, Mark Dreyfus. So it's not only a great example of honouring culture, but it's a really inspiring example of civic partnership. And you know what? Here's an interesting aside. We've been shopping this story around for a fortnight with mainstream media, Alona and myself and others, because it's truly, really, I think, inspiring. Can't get a media bite about it. Why not? Because it's a good story. Because it's an inspiring story of partnership around the Yes vote. So we will contest ideas and not people. This is actually hard. It's difficult. And to be honest, to watch me act out that principle means that you can walk around and watch what I say during the public-facing role that I play, and then you can see me not observing this principle in the privacy of my own home. Because it's hard work, because there's a lot of fairly unsophisticated stuff, hateful stuff and divisive stuff that is actually out there being propagated by people. And it's actually hard to deal with it without looking personal. But where we will commit to is trying to debate the ideas vigorously, but not play the person in the way that is at times happening. We will connect with communities and not tell people what to do or say. And most of all, we will try and ensure safety, not just over the whole campaign, but in our process Together Yes, one of its attractions is that it provides a safe way for people to have considered thinking and discussion and debate. So Together Yes, not Victorian, headquartered in Victoria, headquartered in Clifton Hill, but national. And it's the first time, actually, in our cultural and social history that there's ever been a nationwide formal conversation process occurring over a couple of months. It's the first time ever. In fact, we've got a German TV team coming out to film a discussion next week because they've twigged that it's probably about the first time anywhere around the world that a population has been given the opportunity to come together in small groups in response to discussion materials and have a safe and considered discussion to land at a position. Yes, it was created by us at the Women's Trust. It's not just Victoria, and it's not just a chance for women. Mind you, our experience of this kitchen table model over 20 or so years is that women tend to put up their hands more than men to actually be a conversation host, and then they tend to bring the blokes in to the process. But I'm very gratified to say, wherever I've been around the country over the last 2 months, there's been a really great proportion of blokes stepping up and saying, yep, I'm going to take part. I'm going to pull people together. We've applied this model over the past 20 years so that when I went to From the Heart in October and said, we want to bring our model into the service of the campaign, we weren't saying to them, we've got an idea. It's raw, it's unformulated, but you know what? It could work. We weren't saying that. We were saying we have a model that works and we reckon with the right tailoring, we can make it work in the referendum. Now, quickly, and I only want to touch on some of the origins of our kitchen table model to show you that it's a credible model and we're a credible outfit. This is not to tell you everything we've done. But it did. We rolled it out for the first time ever in the Kennett era in the late 90s. We had over 6,000 men and women involved in Victoria, regional, urban, involved in that process way back then. And as I was saying to Chris and Kath when I was coming here, that all of a sudden, driving here this afternoon, I thought, oh my God, it's crazy, because little memories just coming back to the Brotherhood of St Laurence. Because way back in the Kennett era, and there will be some of you here who are way, way too young and mightn't have even been born then, but it was a really oppressive era in terms of a government that was riding roughshod over people, of introducing an agenda that was very, very dislocative, of a paring back of community services, closure of 300 public schools, you name it. And the Women's Trust designed this project to roll it out over the state, but we went into partnership with 5 other organisations for solidarity and safety, because if we had have gone out on our own, we would have just been smacked down and attacked. And one of the partners was the Brotherhood of St Laurence. And way back then, Bishop Michael Challen and Connie Benn, they were gutsy and courageous, because this was a time when if you stuck your head above the parapet in Victoria, you got smacked down. And Michael Challen and Connie agreed to the Brotherhood coming in on this partnership, providing the financial management for the Purple Sage project and helping us provide the tax deductibility for the 2 female donors who gave us $280,000 back then to run the project across the state. So I hadn't forgotten the Brotherhood. It's just that coming to you today is a hugely serendipitous memory popping up of a really potent partnership back then. But it took guts on the part of the Brotherhood to do that back then as well. And then we decided after Purple Sage, we thought it's such a powerful process. If we were so sadistic as to do it again, how about we do it on one issue that is really complex, because it can handle power and complexity. And we said, yeah, what would it be? Well, to us, it would be a no-brainer back then. It would be on water. Because even in the Purple Sage project, all across the state, people were murmuring, people were worried and anxious about rainfall, scarcity, water inefficiency. They were worried. Ordinary folk out in the ground were worried. And so we did it on water. And the reason I'm telling you that today is because that was the first time that we actually developed specific materials around complex issues that would help people reframe their thinking, jolt them into a different kind of perspective even. So our watermark was the time when we grappled with how do you provide this lower key educational type basis to people coming together and engaging and thinking about things. Probably the most famous deployment of our method, though, was in 2012 and 2013 with the seat of Indi, the federal seat of Indi. So in October 2012, Voices for Indi had just formed, 12 people. Kathy McGowan herself and Alana Johnson came down to me. They were part of Voices for Indi. They came and in short, they said, can your model be rolled out across an electorate? I said, absolutely. And they said, will you help us do it? I said, absolutely. So I spent 6 months with Voices for Indi, training and mentoring them on how to roll out this kitchen table approach across an electorate. The rest is history, because that process, which whetted the appetite of people all across the electorate for democratic engagement and an improved relationship between elected reps and their parliaments, that process, plus a very smart 3-month campaign that they waged, and the fact that Kathy was an enormously credentialed candidate, probably one of the most credentialed candidates ever to throw their hat in the ring, they shaved off a 9% swing nationally. They defied the national trend, and Kathy won the seat for the first time, an independent, won the seat in 110 years of non-independent candidate. And she has since paved the way for Helen Haynes to be the second independent in that seat. Now, it's not to say that the kitchen table process is about independence. What it's about is people who want to see a civic engagement process that is beyond the control of a two-party system. That's why they're attracted to it, because it's about getting a basis for listening to people and for feeding people's wisdom into the political process. So it should be no surprise to you that when Albanese announced there would be a referendum in the first term, that I went straight to our board and I said, double negative coming here, we can't not do this. We can't not find a way of bringing our process into the service of the Yes campaign. So the simple idea, and if anyone's here who's had any kind of educational or teaching connection, I think you'll understand that when you take small groups of people, especially, who can bounce ideas off one another, who can listen hard to another person in their group, and think that's interesting, I hadn't thought about that before, and who can respond to really informative, supportive materials, the change is transformative. So our goal through Together Yes is to enable thousands and hundreds of thousands of Australians from late May to the end of August to have really meaningful discussions, clarifying discussions, and discussions that help them land in a place where they feel confident, they know why they want to support the Yes campaign. So this is how it works. People come together in small groups, preferably between 6 and 9 to 10, no more than 10 because it gets unwieldy, maybe not as few as 4 because it's hard to get a really robust discussion going. And we ask our people who step forward to spend about 2 hours together twice, 3 or 4 weeks apart. 2 hours in a discussion, come back 3 or 4 weeks later and have the second discussion. And we've set this conversation period between late May and end August on the basis that I think I like a bit of a punt on the horses at times. I'm punting, it'll be the 14th of October. It'll be after the footy finals. And it'll be before people start thinking about school holidays and Christmas. So that leaves pretty much October, I think. But by having this conversation process late May to August, it gives people the ability to start holding them now, to start holding them in July, to even hold them in early August and still be there before the referendum. But the reason we wanted to start the conversations in May was because of the psychological importance of lining this civic activism up with the anniversary of the Uluru Statement and the anniversary of the 67 referendum. The most important thing is that we don't expect our groups to come in and confect a conversation about the referendum. That'd be a bit scary for a lot of people because they're not certain, they don't see themselves as having expertise. We're not talking about creating a conversation. We are talking about a guided conversation because we're providing materials that we think will make a real difference. More of that a little bit later. So conversation hosts are the key person in this because we can't run a national conversation process without people who step up and say, I'll have a crack at it. I'll be a host. I'm willing to do it. So the more hosts we have, the more conversations there are, the more Australians are involved. So the thing about the host is about they use their organising capacity and their agency to bring others into the process. Now, instead of being a bit frightened by that, I'd ask you to think, how often do you bring people together to go to the footy, to go on a picnic, to organise a family meal, to go away for a weekend? Most of you are always at it. always able to bring people together within your family, your network, your friends. So it's not really very different from that. It's just that this is more purposeful. And instead of just bringing people together around the table to have a chat about everything, it's no, we're going to work through some issues about the referendum. So you don't need, thankfully, you don't need to be a constitutional lawyer. Thankfully, you don't even need to be a lawyer, because I've heard some pretty dispiriting starting positions from some acquaintances of mine who are lawyers, who should know better, frankly. I better observe that principle of contesting ideas and not people. But you don't need special knowledge. You don't need to be worried saying, but I don't understand the double majority, or I won't be able to answer questions about whether the executive should be made representations to. It doesn't matter, because you're not here. The groups aren't here to sort all of that out. The groups are here to actually land on some important concepts that will help you navigate your position with respect to voting yes. But what our hosts need to do is to download the materials. And I'm happy to say that session 1 went up there on the 25th or 26th of May. And session 2 materials will be up there late next Thursday afternoon, the 15th. It's been a little bit like having a tsunami behind us and dog paddling to get there on time, but we're doing it. So our conversation hosts have to be prepared to get the materials off our website, make copies where instructed, make copies for their group members, and have the sound systems ready and so on. So we reckon by the time you organise your group to come back on 2 occasions, either in your home or in a community venue, it's about 8 hours of your citizen time. I reckon, from my point of view, I'll be personal, this is the most defining issue of my lifetime. As a feminist, as someone who's worked for gender equality for 40 years, this to me is actually even more important than the quest for gender equality, in my view. So 8 hours of your time, amortised over the next 4 months, is about 15 minutes a week, I think, if that. I don't know if the sound is going to work on this. I might move over it. There's a film, it's on our website, of 6 people have already signed up to be hosts. I want to move on. So I bridged this yesterday because up until now, we've moved all around the country, talking to people, building up our conversation hosts. And it's been a leap of faith. We've had to say to them, we'll supply you with quality materials. And they're having to say, okay, well, keep our fingers crossed. Now we're saying the first lot of materials are up on the website. So in session 1, for example, yes, groups do listen to the statement from the heart. If they've got a laptop, if the sound's okay, the conversation host will press the button and listen to Megan Davis reciting the statement from the heart. If they haven't got the capacity to do that, the statement's in the kit that the conversation host gets. But we've got 3 other activities. Recognising and honouring the oldest civilisation on earth. I'll come back to that in a minute. The centuries-long struggle for recognition and justice. So what we've done there, for example, is to construct a chronology in its depth and detail that doesn't exist anywhere else right now. And what the host will do is clear the table and put out, face down, 29 cards that he has to cut. 29 cards, face down. And then in a process of slow reveal, people will turn cards up, read them, and put them back down. And what you'll see is a chronology that I predict none of you has seen before, which reveals the constant struggle to be heard, to have a voice, to be accorded justice. There will be some that you identify with and vaguely think about, but you will not have seen this before. And then there's a second deck of cards. This takes a bit of time, second deck of cards. And we might have to be saying to people, don't turn these face down, put them face up to save time. And they started in about the 1950s, and there's only 14 cards in this one. And they all show allyship. They all show that when non-Indigenous people have stepped up and been in solidarity with Indigenous people, we have achieved some remarkable things. Nowhere near enough, but some remarkable things. Now, that chronology doesn't exist in that form. And again, I would defy most people, when they see that evidence of struggle and they understand that states or territories are all implicated, and the struggle has been enormous, it's been profound, it's not on the public record much. But if you get that, if you connect empathetically with that chronology, you'll understand why the case for recognition now is so overdue. So that's the kind of material that we've provided. In session 2, which will go online next week, on session 2, we confront people as gently as possible. We confront people with the disadvantage. And, you know, there's for some reason in this country, and, you know, the Brotherhood has had such a long tradition of fighting for justice and social justice. The big question is, why haven't we been so moved as a country to accept that Indigenous Australians, as a consequence of dispossession, are the most marginalised, have had so much pain and intergenerational trauma inflicted on them by our settler history? Why are we not so moved to do something about that? There's an industrial deafness over generations about the kind of hardship and marginalisation that has been inflicted, I should say, on Indigenous people. So we present the closing the gap stuff. Then we have an inspiring story about, for example, the new movement or the revitalising movement across Australia in some quarters now around Indigenous women being able to birth on country, being able to actually give birth on country, supported by appropriate medical services. That kind of rebirthing initiative holds the key to reducing infant mortality, the death of babies, and putting Indigenous kids on a better path into the future. And that's the kind of change that the voice can bring, because that kind of wisdom and experience at the grassroots level is what is meant to be listened to by governments who would invest in programs that work for Indigenous people. And then we talk about the voice in an animated film, and then we have a compilation video of several Indigenous people and Fiona Stanley as a non-Indigenous woman talking about how the voice will make a material difference out on the ground. And then we will wrap up with the group exploring how might the voice make for a better world, not just for Indigenous Australians, but actually for our country. So that's the kind of learning journey that we're taking people on. So here's a quick example. This is activity 2. Very deliberate choice of words here, not just recognising the oldest continuing culture, which is often the wording, but recognising and honouring the oldest continuing civilisation, not just culture, but civilisation on Earth. Because we tend to use the word civilisation within a Western lens. It's all about technology, building cities, dams, infrastructure, putting people into space, civilisation. We're saying it's not just the only application. And because Aussies are great travellers, I wanted to find a way in which Aussie travellers who know about Stonehenge and know about the Terracotta Warriors and know about Plato's Republic and know about the pyramids of Giza, that they actually have a quick recognition that, hey, in the scheme of things, 2,650 years BCE is actually not all that long when you look at it in the context of deep time of Aboriginal civilization. And then I wanted to find a way, because the settler narrative that I've been brought up in this country, as have most Australians, would have you think that there was no one here. But Mabo put paid to that, thankfully. But the settler narrative would have you think that there was not much going on here, that it wasn't a terribly sophisticated settlement. Oh, yes, it was. If I asked you how many Aboriginal languages were spoken by oral tradition, were spoken over these thousands of generations, how many would you think? 10? 200? It's hundreds. And there's something like 27 families of languages in the Australian continent, and there are 4 in Europe. But the sophistication is across many dimensions. And what we're hoping is that in this one activity, that people will actually start to realise that if you want to recognise and honour first occupants over thousands of generations, what's the big deal about bringing that into the Constitution? I mean, we should have done it yonks ago. And then the next question is, well, if we've dealt Indigenous people a really bad deal since settlement, and we want to actually make amends and put things on a different trajectory, how about we create a mechanism in our Constitution and a permanent voice so that we can start to course correct? Now, I reckon the moral and ethical basis to saying yes is so transparent, it's so obvious. Anyhow, that's the kind of stuff. This is the power of the movement. 10 people in a group, 1 conversation host, 10 people in a group, 2 discussion periods, working on the basis, and we'll put a call to action at the end of session 2. Okay, you're feeling a lot clearer, you've cut to the chase, you've got rid of the noise that's going on out there, and you've landed in a spot where you think you feel pretty sure. Now go out and have up until polling day at least 10 other conversations with your scout troop, with your sports club people, with your recalcitrant uncle, with the elderly relative in a nursing home, with the 19-year-old who's thought that coming together in a group is a bit nerdy. Go and have these discussions with everyone that you feel comfortable and safe to talk with. You don't have to engage in escalating stuff, but you could say, you know what, I've actually decided I'm going to vote yes and why. Even that can have an impact on somebody who's a bit wobbly. So 3,000, for example, conversation hosts brings 30,000 people. 30,000 people having at least 10 conversations through their families and their workplaces and whatever is 300,000 people. That's over 250,000. So this is how the conversation movement can grow and have impact. This is the most important slide in the deck, because when we got going earlier this year, time and time again, people say, don't need to join together, yes, because I'm already voting yes, and so are all my mates. And I'd say to them, guess what, sunshine? It's not going to carry the referendum. It's putting it at risk. And this is why. Because at the moment, the polling shows 4 camps. There are those in the hard yes, like myself, and probably quite some of you. We're not for changing. We've made up our mind. Yeah. And nothing's going to change us. But remember, in the same-sex marriage proposition, that the degree of community support for that same-sex marriage proposition declined by about 10% in the course of a nasty campaign where people retreated, not sure anymore because of what was going on. It can't afford to happen here. The hard yes is in the low 50s, percentage-wise, 52, 53%. Then there's a sizable minority of soft yes. And these are people who are saying, look, yeah, recognition over time, overdue, but, you know what, I mean, why don't you just legislate the voice? You read The Age, there's been letters to that effect this week. I want to pen a reply back and say, well, go and remember ATSIC when it was abolished after 15 years, set up by the Liberals, abolished by Labor, getting it right in that respect. With soft yes, they're quite possibly able to, in the end, get to a point of yes, but they need some time and support, and they need to think about it a little bit and maybe get themselves out of the clutches of particular commentators. Then there's the soft no, sizable minority, and they're saying, no, not really interested. Do you know about the Uluru Statement? No, don't know what you mean. And if pressed, probably saying, no, don't see why the Constitution needs changing. No, don't believe that Australian Aboriginal people should be privileged to the extent of us migrants who have worked really hard since we got here. And then there's the hard no. They're not for changing. And I got into trouble some weeks ago because people thought I was being mean to the hard no's when I said I'm not interested in them. Well, pragmatically, no, I'm not, because we've got limited time, limited resources, and we're not going to spend it on trying to get hard no's changing their minds when they probably won't. We want to spend our time and effort in supporting people through a process that might actually get them voting yes in the end. And I would remind you, if you read an article by Nikki Savar about 7 or 8 weeks ago in The Age, she said, and she's been the only journalist to be honest about this, she said, yes, it is perfectly legitimate that some people argue no and then it's being racist. But she said, understand that all racists will vote no. I would have to say, however, that so far, in watching the debates closely, I have yet to see much sophistication trotted out by people arguing no. I see a lot of fear. I see scaremongering. I see alarmism. I see sensationalism. I see some people saying, but no, because there's too many dissenting voices amongst Indigenous people. I haven't seen a lot of carefully crafted, thoughtful reasons for voting no. So our point, if you're in the hard yes, it's not enough to go into the polling booth and vote yes. It's not enough. You have to do your bit to actually convince 1, 2, 3, 4 others at least to come with you in the same way. So our website, togetheryes.com.au is our key link. That's where our conversation hosts have got a login portal. That's where you find everything, including session 1 materials to download. Nearly finished. So it's pretty clear to you from me today why we can't afford it to fail. And the main reason we can't afford it to fail is that Indigenous Australians have fought and struggled for 200 years at least for recognition and to deal with the injustices imposed on them by Australian settler history and the settler narrative. I think if the referendum fails, it will set reconciliation back in this country for generations. And which Prime Minister post-Albanese would dare to put up his or her hand in 15 or 17 years' time and say, we're going to try and change the Constitution and recognise Indigenous Australians? And what it will do, putting it bluntly, if it fails, it will actually also give subliminal permission for racists to not only continue with their prejudiced views, but actually be emboldened. That's what happened when Gillard was Prime Minister, because no one or hardly anybody called out the sexism surrounding her, that it gave permission for all the sexists in the country with platforms to embolden their views and become even more sexist. Marcia, oh, come to Marcia. I think you know that the referendum is complicated in the sense that it has to go through 2 steps. First of all, every Australian who votes, of all those voters, there has to be a majority, irrespective of where they live. There has to be a majority. It has to be at least 50.x% of Australians saying yes for that part of the process to be ticked off. But then the second part is that the states then disappear, because the protocol is that to then succeed, a majority of Australian states have to have achieved a majority within their state. There are 6 Australian states, a majority is 4. So you'd want Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia, Tassie, for instance, that if they can return yes votes within their patch, then it carries. If Western Australia is soft, under 50%, and Queensland is soft, it doesn't matter if 4 states achieve majorities. So Marcia Langton is dead right, that if we want to see in 2023, at a point in our history, and it's a modest proposal, there's nothing scary about it, if we want to see this get up, and voting is not just enough, we have to get out and we have to actually use our influence safely, civilly, and thoughtfully to try and bring others with you. It won't happen any other way. So become a host. Or if you don't feel confident enough, get a mate and say, we'll co-host. We'll come together and we'll co-host. Convince people to become hosts. And our promise, you register with our website, Together Yes, and we will do what we've done with the website materials thus far, is that we'll promise to make it actually a rewarding experience, so that you look back later this year and you say, I voted yes for all the right reasons, but you know what? I also just stepped up a little bit more and I made it possible for others to land in the same position, and we did it together and we pulled it off as a nation. We've only got to this point where I can talk to you today because we had a small number, less than 10, but a small number of people who gave us the money before Christmas to start. It's a lean machine, got nothing to spare, but we've raised enough money to build the website and employ 1 or 2 staff. We've got fabulous campaign partners like the Uniting Church across Australia, for instance, and the Jewish communities. We've got fabulous web designers who have discounted their service to us because of their passion. And our artwork on the postcards and everything is because I told you at the beginning that we've had this wonderful partnership with Koori Women. Well, it's such a wonderful partnership. In our new little office up in Queen's Parade, we commissioned a young Yorta Yorta artist near Echuca, Amanda Wilkinson, Wilkinson, to develop for us a mural that depicts our journey over 31 years. And Alkina gave us the permission to use her artwork for our campaign as well. So that's it for the presentation. Over to you for questions.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mary. So my first question to you is, I've started the process, I've registered, I have set the first date, and then I started calling around friends and saying, invite you to come round to my place, we'll do this. And then 4 weeks later, you've got to come back again. And that was all weird for people because, you know, in the COVID years, you might catch up every so often and then you might not see people for a little while. And it was that conversation about, and then you come back and we'll have another conversation. Can you just maybe talk about that and how we can convince people that the two thing is a good thing?
Yeah, well, I think for a start, I mean, our very strong preference is that people come together around the table, and that's based on what COVID told us, especially, is how much we missed coming around the table and being in the presence of other people. Because, I think we take for granted, if you stop and think, you look at yourselves and you think, if you're not enrolled in a course, if you're not reading a book a week, if you're not spending 15 hours a week on watching TV, how do you actually learn stuff through life? And I reckon when you stop to think and do a bit of an audit of how do you actually continue to percolate ideas and maybe take on new ideas, it's often just being in the presence of other people. So how do you make it attractive, Chris? I think you say to them, look, together, yes.
And I'm doing dry July.
Okay, dry July. You don't have to cook. You don't have to do anything like that. You might put the kettle on. But I think you say to people, here's a process. It's simple. It's elegant. I'm going to bring a group of people together. I'm going to do it twice. And because Together Yes has structured it so that 3 to 4 week period is even for time to think and reflect and notice stuff. But you say to people, it's a really new and exciting way of approaching the referendum. Talk it up, get them there. And at the end of the first session, which our feedback coming in from groups is they're loving it.
Okay.
And I think you can, instead of saying to people at the beginning, now you have to come back 3 or 4 weeks later, just say it's a 2-stage process. The first meeting is X.
Yeah, good
And then
idea.
at the end of the first meeting, you say, now we're going to find the date at which we all come back. And I think
That's
most
a good
people
idea.
will want to be back. They want to come back. It's actually, even though the content is serious, it's serious stuff. It's not frivolous, but it's actually pleasant working through it as a group.
Mm.
I mean, I got a feedback yesterday from a woman in Brisbane saying, because our survey said, what were the challenges? And she said the challenge was to stop talking.
Yeah, send everybody home.
Yeah.
Okay, questions online, and I think the chat's not enabled, but the Q&A section's enabled if people online want to ask a question. But in the room, any questions, comments, feedback? Chris Price wants to say something, I can tell.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a member of local sporting club and some other community groups. So I just think actually a nice little small number around the table, but that number in some ways I was thinking who were the people I should invite? There's 10, hundreds of people there. I think invite the trying to think of the people who would be right in the conversation.
Yeah.
It seems to be wanting the people at that conversation to go out and do more.
It tends to happen, actually. And we're not.
Questions, sorry, just to repeat it in the chat. Can't go online.
Oh, sorry, the question was, Chris has got 100 friends or more than 100 friends. This is Chris Price at his sports club, and he's trying to work out how to sort of, I guess, work out who to invite and how to go about that process.
And so my question first to Chris, my response would be, which I think, would be a response to quite a few of you. You select your people according to your comfort level. We're not asking you to go and round up belligerent, combative, hard-nosed. But what you'll find is that people that do come, if there are some who are uncertain, they're not there yet, and they may not be there yet through the process, we do set an agreement at the beginning of the session, a group agreement with these principles, and you get people say, are we happy to sign on, with these principles? People say, yeah, fine, sounds great. People tend to bring their best selves to this kind of method. They tend, when you engage them and people get listened to and no one's biting the heads off another person, they tend to relax a bit and enjoy that dynamic. One of my staff, Tariq, he's actually getting his soccer club, his soccer team, they're all young blokes, mainly of Turkish heritage. He's getting all of them into his discussion group. And he's saying to them, come on, guys, you haven't thought about this enough, I can tell. Come around to my place, we're going to do some work on this. And they're coming. So it's your comfort level is important. And some people might be more comfortable bringing in people who aren't terribly certain or saying, oh, no, I don't believe in it. You know, what we're finding so far is that some groups have already met in the last fortnight. They now want to do more. They're hot to trot. They want to keep it going. But it's not up to us to mandate who or how or what, but just these are the parameters. We do expect people to behave themselves in these groups. We show the group agreement. My experience over 20 years that when people do come into a forum like this, they actually value being heard and listened to. And even if someone keeps their mouth shut the whole time, it doesn't mean to say they're not thinking.
Questions, Kath?
Dana, you're
Just come up here. Close to the mic, thank you.
Yes, just interested to know how you might deal with people who say, yes, but I just want to know, you know, the risk in changing the Constitution. I just want to know how it's not going to end up all regularly in the High Court.
Yeah.
You know, they're just one thing that they're stuck on and they, you know, badger away at that one point.
Our response to that, Kath, will be that the sessions themselves are not going to deal with those issues, but the website will progressively from now till polling day. So we're just amassing what we're hearing as the critique, the no case, and we will deal with it in a constructive and thoughtful way for our audience. But in the sessions themselves, no, we're saying you need to think about the issues that underpin the referendum. And it's not about whether the Constitution is sacred, it's whether the two big questions are, do we believe that Indigenous Australians should be recognised in our foundation document? Yes or no? And do we believe that we need to create a mechanism by which they are heard and listened to in turning the trajectory upwards in terms of a deal that improves their lives equal to other Australians? Yes or no? They're the two issues. Now, if you read reliable sources, not Sky, you don't listen to Sky News for reliable news at all. I mean, I've watched Sky News, for example, where there's this terribly animated discussion between Chris Merritt, who writes for The Australian, and Alan Jones. And those two dudes concluded that the Uluru Statement from the Heart was a complete sham because it was plagiarised from Africa years ago. I mean, the whole thing is an absolute crock. But they've just taken something and they've made it into a dishonest scandal, which is why up in Nowra months ago, a woman in the audience, a non-Indigenous woman, was really uncomfortable with my presentation. And she said at the end, the Uluru Statement's been plagiarised from Africa. And I said, well, I don't think it has, I'm not going there. And then I researched it and found out that it's just shocking what people are prepared to run with. So my point, Kath, is that, you know, there are enough sources out there that High Court judges like Robert French and Kenneth Hayne have said it will not end up in litigation. Well, if I've got to choose between Kenneth Hayne and Robert French or Alan Jones or Andrew Bolt, I'll go with the High Court judges. It's pretty simple. And so when people say to me, a lot of Australian Indigenous people don't want a voice, I'll say, well, hang on a minute. All the research and polling I've seen is that more than 80% of Indigenous Australians do, in fact, want a voice and recognise in the Constitution. So I'm accepting that consensus. And when people say to me, but hang on, Indigenous Australians, there's a lot, like Senator Price and others saying, we don't want a voice. Well, I'm saying, and they're saying there's disunity. what are we to do if Aboriginal people can't agree? And I say, well, hang on a minute. When we go to a federal election and when we go to a state election, are Australians united? Are we all going and voting the same way? No. There's dissenting voices all over the shop at every election. Independents, Teals, Greens, Labor, Liberal, Californians, Pauline Hanson. I mean, there's so much dissent going into the ballot box. Why do we expect a higher standard of non-dissent from Indigenous Australians? No, the trick is, or the answer is, go with where the majority, the strong consensus is. And you have a delegation at Uluru of 250 people from all over this country through a regional dialogue session, which is an impressive process. If they say voice, treaty, truth, it's good enough for me. Good enough for me. I'm not going to argue the toss about that.
Beautiful, thanks. Any other questions in the room? Comments, contributions? Grace, I just saw your hand up. It went towards your nose, but I think it was like... Yeah, come up the front.
So I think something like with the kitchen table that I'm always conscious of, I guess, you know, my work is with First Nation staff and being an Aboriginal person, is any more extra load on First Nations people, because this is a really odd year in the sense is watching constant media about your community and everyone having an opinion I don't think is necessarily healthy or good for my well-being at least. And so I think with the kitchen tables, I like them because it takes weight off of, but also that that's something that people go into them about, is that, you know, this is part of taking the weight off First Nations people doing everything. Only 3% of the population. It's a lot, and it's a lot to say here because most people know who are Aboriginal at work. So yeah, I like that aspect, but it'd be good to get your feedback on how you go about, you know, kind of in that narrative about taking pressure off the community and not more pressure.
Yeah, no, great point. And you know, the thing is, what I've also found a bit unnerving over the last few months is some people, non-Indigenous people, sort of accusing us of coming into this and have we got permission? And I say, well, hang on a minute. For a start, we've very carefully negotiated a partnership with From the Heart and now the Yes 23 campaign. And we're working in close and respectful partnership. So yes, there's permission. But then I say, but hang on. As you rightly said, under 4% of Australians will be voting from Indigenous communities. The overwhelming majority of voters determining the outcome of this are non-Indigenous people. We have to do the heavy lifting. Why should we expect even the whole campaign to be carried by Indigenous leadership? The Indigenous leadership I'm seeing is phenomenal. The leadership of Megan Davis, of Pat Anderson, of Marcia Langton, of Thomas Mayo, of Dean Parkin, of Rachel Perkins, is stupendous. But we should be, as non-Indigenous people, stepping up to the plate because it's our issue. It's our making. I'm not saying we have to do what John Howard said and wear the black armband view of history and suck our teeth and be anguished because we didn't cause the genocide, we didn't cause the forcible removal. No, we didn't. Guess what? The society that we are part of did, and we want to make amends. We don't want to see the scales tilted all the time against Indigenous people in this country. That's dismissed by the no camp as warm, fuzzy stuff. It's a crock. This is a fundamental issue about nationhood and justice. It's not a question about treating some people more privileged than others and so on. So I think this question of you know, feeling a bit semi-paralysed because we're white or we're not Indigenous, I say, let go of that. It's not useful. Respectfully work with Indigenous people in the campaign, absolutely, no brainer. But let go of these feelings that, you know, I can't have a view on this, or I can't think about, you know, my way through the referendum issues because I'm not finding the voice in the Aboriginal community that I'm happy with. Let go of it.
I think something we went to recently, one of the Aboriginal women speakers there said, don't be afraid. You know, you might make a mistake, you might, you know, say something you later find out is, you know, not quite correct. But if you go into it with an open heart and with the right intent, any of those little mistakes that you might make or blunders along the way will be accepted and we can all learn.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the big differences with the same-sex marriage proposition, coming back to that, is that when Australians took part in that postal survey, as it was, most voters could look across their extended family and community network and identify someone who's gay. But the sort of sad reality is that most Australian voters haven't had the privilege, actually, of connecting and learning from Indigenous people, especially urban people in big cities like Melbourne and Sydney. So that disconnect is palpable, which is why we have a film in session 1, for example, a short 3-minute video of Jackie Huggins, an extraordinary Indigenous leader. And we've even deliberately set the camera work up so that in that short 3 minutes of Jackie reflecting on what it was like as an 11-year-old kid to see her Indigenous mum campaigning for the 67 referendum, that Jackie's face is full on because we wanted people, non-Indigenous people, to emotionally feel a connection with her indigeneity, to see her up front in her majesty and her grace and her calmness and her generosity. We wanted people who haven't seen an Aboriginal person before at close range to actually see a person at close range. Now, you might think that sounds a bit corny, but that's a political reality. If there are voters who have not connected with Indigenous people in their lives, is there a way we can form some kind of connection in the sessions themselves? I mean, I can't tell you how, you know, I mean, I grew up, as I said to you earlier, on Gunditjmara territory, southwest Victoria. My folks didn't bat an eyelid at my brother and I riding around the town with Indigenous kids on our bikes. But I heard the stuff around the town. I heard the white folk around my town with their racism and their prejudice. And it took me to get to my 50s to even know about the Yumarella Wars in Port Fairy and around Warrnambool that were a form of genocide. I didn't know that. Wasn't part of my secondary schooling. And it was only, thankfully, through my job at the Trust over the last 20 years or more that I've had the benefit and the pleasure of working with Leanne Miller, of meeting June Oscar from Kimberley, from Fitzroy Crossing, Marcia Langton, Jackie Huggins, Megan Davis, Pat Anderson, Noel Pearson, Pat Dodson, that you actually realise how much you've missed out on, to be honest. And I reckon I could disengage from my work at the Trust and spend the rest of my life learning and understanding about the richness of the civilisation that was here for so long. So to honour the descendants of that civilisation, to me, is an absolute no-brainer.
Oh, beautiful.